Okay, friends, we're going to allow some time for everybody to join us before we get started. If you are joining us on Spotify Live, then you know that you can give us your ASL in the chat as we get started. We know that there are people coming in from the holidays, so we want to just give everybody some time before we start discussing this case. So, if you're on any of our other streaming platforms, let me switch things. What's the other one? Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. If you're on either one of those, hello, welcome to True Crime Convos. I am your host, Lainey Hobbs. I am the host of the True Crime Fan Club podcast, the hope the world needed. No, the host of the Crimes of Passion podcast, a Spotify original from Parcast, and the It's Haunted What Now podcast, which is on a little bit of a hiatus, but it's coming back live and in living color very soon. As you guys know, as you join the chat on Spotify Live, or if you're joining it anywhere else, we always start with the ASL. So please be sure to drop your ASL in the chat or in any of the comment sections on Facebook, YouTube, or on Twitch. So I'll go first. I am Lainey, 34, cis female, she, her pronouns, and I am currently in Dallas. Everybody else, let us know what's up. Okay. Sorry. So I know this might be maybe a short episode. I'm not sure. I know everybody is getting back from the uh-oh, can you not hear me? You said. Can you hear me now? Can anybody else hear me? Hello? Okay, now you do? Awesome. Perfect. Just making sure because I'm a little scared. Okay. So remember, drop your ASL in the chat as we get started. We know that it is a holiday, the day after a holiday, so we might be a little bit short on this episode, which is just fine. Don't forget that tonight is our True Crime Tuesdays, if you will. So I'll also be joining the Popspiracy live show that's happening on Spotify Live tonight to talk about some of these crazy haunted places. And I can't wait because it's going to be legit. So if you didn't get my ASL earlier, 23. Wow, I just read somebody else's. It was Pierre's. I wish I was 23. 34-year-old female, cis female, she, her pronouns in Dallas, Texas. Drop your ASL in the chats anywhere else. Tonight, we are going to be discussing the Turpin family case and how Jennifer Turpin, essentially, spoiler alert, saved her siblings' lives. She is an incredible person. I deeply admire her, and I have been following her like on TikTok and on Instagram and stuff. So I'm just really in awe of the way that she's been able to overcome kind of the circumstances that she unfortunately was born into. She had no say in. So we're going to be talking first about the lives of David and Louise Turpin. Now, I forgot. Let me see. So I think Jennifer and Jordan. I think I said Jennifer earlier. I meant to say Jordan. Jordan's the one who escaped. But Jennifer, I believe she refers to David and Louise as David and Louise. I don't think she refers to them as mother and father. So I will probably just stick to that. I won't say like their parents or anything like that. So let's talk about David and Louise Turpin. So David Turpin was born on October 17th, 1961 in Princeton, West Virginia. In 1976, he enters the ninth grade science fair and he wins first place. His senior motto in 1979 in the yearbook is, I got to pop up, sorry, was never do today what you can put off until tomorrow. And I think that speaks volumes to how David is as a general person. So he and his family attended a Pentecostal church where Wayne Robinette was the preacher. Now, when David was 17, he became interested in Wayne's 10-year-old daughter, Louise. And I want to just kind of poll the audience. Remember, as you join, drop your ASL in the chat. I kind of want to poll the audience on this, either if you're watching on one of our streams or you're on Spotify Live right now. A 17-year-old to me is like not an adult, right? Like they have very maybe adultish feelings, but I don't necessarily like couple them in as an adult. So at this point, because he's expressing interest in this young girl, if you will, do we think and would we consider him to be a like a pedophile, if you will? Because I mean, we this is when it would be helpful to have like a forensic psychologist on, right? Um, would we consider him to be that at 17? Yeah, right? So, like, I would too. I would classify him as a pedophile, but I think, like, maybe in the traditional sense that we think, like, creepy old men, 45 plus or 20 plus, I don't know, 30 plus, like we see on To Catch a Predator. But I've seen it where, especially within the county that I live in, when they do these task force and stuff, where they've arrested, like 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, etc., for these types of sex crimes against minors. So I would still consider him, even at 17, to be a pedophile, a 10-year-old. I mean, that's like your sibling, like your sibling's age. It's kind of weird. And I don't know that that's a natural attraction type of thing. Like, sure, sure, somebody being like 10 years younger than you when you're 30 isn't a big deal. When you're 17, it's kind of weird. So, anyways, he becomes interested in Louise Robinette, who's 10 at the time. Now, Louise was one of six siblings, and one of her two sisters claimed the household they grew up in was abusive. Now, while Louise was in high school, um, at his alma mater, David was attending Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. So in 1984, he graduates with a bachelor's degree in electrical and computer engineering. And it's not clear exactly when Louise and David began dating, but I would have a feeling that if he was expressing interest, he was likely grooming her. And if some of the alleged abuses are true in terms of like the sexual abuse that was possible, that David may have done on the girls, his children, then I would say it's likely that he was grooming them, or grooming Louise, in between that time. I don't think that they were just like, "Oh, we're friends," and not doing anything. I definitely would say he likely was grooming her. I would feel safe in that assumption. So we don't really know when they began dating, but in 1985, when she was 16 years old, David, who was then 24 at the time, convinces her, high school, to basically let him sign Louise out for the day. So, under that ruse, if you will, he ends up taking her to get married. And they make it to Texas before they're caught and then forced to go back home. And Louise's mother, Phyllis, had been well aware of the relationship. So, at some point, mom, I don't know if like, this is the '80s, so I can't really go back and be like, "Oh, things were different," but maybe things were different. I wasn't even born, so I don't even know. But I think maybe with these, especially religious type of families, when their child, especially a daughter, is engaged in, a relationship that would be improper or out of wedlock, it's easier to be like, "Oh, yes, they're getting married and we'll force them to get married and it'll be fine." And that's kind of the life you have to live with. Oh, look, Eric is here. Hello, my friend. Um, so yes, it's a little like they had some kind of support from her mom, which me as a mom would be like, I'm gonna murder my child, but save their lives at the same time. So Um, she was supportive of their relationship, or was aware of their relationship. So Louise's parents weren't trying to fight the marriage. They wanted to bless it and have Louise married in their presence. That's what they were most upset about. They weren't upset that their 16-year-old daughter ran away with her 24-year-old boyfriend slash fiance to get married. They were more mad that they weren't present to witness it, which is ridiculous to me. But Louise's father, Wayne, was hurt that the relationship essentially had been hidden from him this entire time. And then this caused Wayne and Phyllis to divorce because this secret for him was just like unacceptable. He should have been in the know. I agree with him in that sense, so that maybe at least he would have had some sense to stop it or to prevent it. But at that point, like as a parent, is it does it even make sense? Is it something you can even contend with? Like, if you have a 16-year-old who believes she's in love with this 24-year-old who's likely been grooming her since she was 10 years old, that the relationship should stop or that they shouldn't see each other. You know what I mean? I don't know that that's a thing that's easily prevented by father knowing about the relationship, but that's just me. Now, once David and Louise were married, they ended up moving to a neighborhood north of us that's nowhere near Dallas. Just kidding. It's a big thing between Dallas and Fort Worth because people lump them together. So if you're a native, you get it. But they end up moving to Fort Worth, Texas, and their first child, Jennifer, was born in 1988. 11 more children were born while they lived in Texas, and the last child was born in California. Can you imagine that? That's like just pregnant your entire like life. She's like the Michelle Duggar of true crime. Now, when neighbors were asked, they said they remember seeing um, feces, piles of garbage, and dead pets around their house. This comes later, but more people found these things after the Turpins had moved out of Fort Worth. And some neighbors found ropes tied to the beds after the family left their second home in a hurry. And I'm just like, yeah. It's because they were being investigated that they left. So there was abuse noticed in the very beginning. So, and they were in Fort Smith when Jennifer attended the third grade at a local public school. She was teased relentlessly, mocked for her terrible body odor and for wearing the same clothes every day. And this again, I would put on the educators, right? Like it boggles my mind that this wasn't really noticed. Like maybe this could have been prevented early on had more people paid attention. And I get like they withdrew them eventually from like any public life or persona, but it is really kind of like appalling that you have this kid who's showing up every single day, who looks filthy, smells filthy, and is in the same clothing. Like that alone to me would be like, you know what, let's just maybe call CPS. Because at the very least, you could be like, here's how you do proper hygiene. Here's some clothes. And the most you could do is remove the children from that home if there is something going on. Water break, hydrate everybody, especially if you're in a hot state. My God, it was 105 today. I don't live a life like that anymore. I used to love Texas summers, but I'm weird. So in 2001, the Hill County Sheriff's Department responds to a call at the Turpin home. A 4-year-old was bitten by a border collie, and in 2003, deputies again made contact with the Turpin family after their pigs got loose and ate 55 pounds of dog food that belonged to the next door neighbor. And so there were no charges filed in that case, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's like, okay. So while they were in Texas, one of the daughters tried to run away, but the police ended up bringing her back home. And a former neighbor went to the home after the Turpins had moved out, and the home was just disgusting. There were diapers that were piled waist high. Did anybody ever watch the show Hoarders? This is a random segue, but whenever we talk about diapers piled waist high, I feel the need to share this story. So, content warning if you've ever not seen the show Hoarders. Um, when I was pregnant and then after I gave birth, I watched it nonstop. Um, so, do you, the diapers, right? So, this lady in one of the so Oscar's like, "Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about." So, the ladies in one of this particular like, in one of these Hoarders episodes was using, like, adult diapers and just, like, throwing them around the house. Doesn't like, no trash. I mean, at that point, your whole house is a trash receptacle, but, I mean, they had to start somewhere, right? So, literally, like, because their toilet wasn't working because of their hoarding situation, they just, like, started using diapers nonstop and just, like, piling them up left and right. So much so that the people who were there to help them clean were like, "This is a biohazard issue. Like, this is crazy." Um, don't get me started on the poop lady. The poop bucket lady, that was nuts. We could, oh my god, I could do a whole thing on hoarders, like, the worst of the worst. And it's really sad because they do have, like, mental health issues, that stem from a lot of this of why they do it. So, like, I'm not shaming the fact that they hoard. I'm just, like, appalled in my mind that, the whole diaper situation, because, like, a rational person would not do something like that. But when you have somebody who is dealing with a mental health issue, then like, these kinds of things happen. So definitely not shaming the fact that they are hoarders or were hoarders. A lot of them did get help, which is great and wonderful. But when you see those situations, you're just kind of like surprised that somebody lives that way. Um, the poop bucket lady. She had like no okay, sorry to digress. We'll get back to the story, I promise. But she had no concept of like she was using a bucket for her toilet needs, right? First and second toilet needs. And she would, like, carry this bucket, like a Home Depot bucket, outside, dump it in the yard when it was full, and she would not wash her hands because they didn't have running water. So then she would go and cook her food like that too, like, just she'd finish and then she'd also use, like, a mug to okay, it's getting too much, but you get the idea, right? Like, there was just a lot of unsanitary practices. She literally thought, because of how bad it was, she literally thought that this she was like, you get used to the smells in your house, right? Even a smell like that, you get used to it if you're around it long enough. She literally thought it was just like cats. She was like, "Oh, I thought it was just because of the cats." Like, everybody was, like, giving me a hard time because the cats pooped in the house, and I'm like, "Okay, well, that's part of it, but bigger part is that you're literally, like, spilling sewage that hasn't gone through the toilet, or the pipes into your yard," which you can't do. So, yeah, if you haven't watched Hoarders, highly recommend. It does give a great insight into how people get there and everything like that. Anyhow, so anyhow, sorry, my dog's, like, dragging at my door. Um, that's me. Okay, so they get mad about the whole dog cat or pigs eating dog food, but don't really give a crap about the kids, essentially. I mean, that's literally their whole lives. So, again, they had the child that ran away, and then we're back at the diapers. Sorry, I lost my place because I was looking at everything. So they had the diapers piled waist high. They had 2 pets, a dog and a cat that were found dead in the home. That's also very common in a hoarder's home, is that their pets will die in the home because they either get lost or they get crushed or they're just unhealthy. The neighbors said they saw padlocks on everything, like on the closet doors, the bathroom doors, and the refrigerator. There were ropes tied to the beds that remained there even after the family left. There had been feces smeared on on the walls, and the family had suddenly just left the home, reportedly after one of their daughters was seen walking down the road and asking how to get a driver's license. So the family ends up purchasing a double wide home and placed it on the same property as the Rio Vista home, and the older children were left in the trailer for weeks at a time, and the parents brought them food once a week. And so it's ridiculous, like, the whole thing. Um, they end up moving to California because David, who was working as an engineer at Lockheed Martin until 2010, when he just, like, decided to abruptly quit his job, he ends up moving the family to Maria, California in June of 2010, and they end up living in this rental home. So David begins working as an engineer for Northrop Grumman, Grumman, which is an aeronautics and defense technology company. The next year, David was earning approximately $140,000 a year, which is a significant amount of money. He was the only person bringing in any kind of funds. And again, it's a good amount of money for maybe like a nuclear family, like 3 people, 4 people. For 12 plus people, probably does not stretch a lot, especially in California. So in October 2011, he and Louise decide that they're going to renew their wedding vows in Las Vegas, a city I am not a fan of, just in general, because it's not my style. But in a ceremony that was officiated by, an Elvis impersonator, there's a video out there, so if you guys are on YouTube, you can all find it, look at it. They have tons of, like, behind like, home videos, that the Turpins filmed while they were out parading their emaciated children and renewing their stupid wedding vows. So at the time, they had 12 children, and they all accompanied their parents to the vow renewal. And I mean, in those pictures, also my strange addiction, yes. In those pictures, they the kids don't look healthy. You know, they all have that bowl cut that David Turpin has. Remind think Will from Stranger Things or whatever. Um, and they're they're very, very skinny, like, extremely emaciated is what they look like. And I know that there are some people, like, if you guys on YouTube or anywhere else, if you watch YouTube or follow anything on YouTube, if you know who Eugenia Cooney is, that's the same excuse Eugenia Cooney uses, even though she is suffering from an eating disorder. She, she also says, like, that's just how she naturally is, and that is just not the truth. Um, so, you know, you see people who are like, "I'm just naturally skinny." For some, that is true. For these children, it was not the truth. And again, who's gonna say anything? This is Las Vegas. Like, I literally saw so many people from all walks of life just within a, like, 2 square mile radius. And I saw I'll never forget this. I saw this, homeless woman who was literally who had, like, multiple wigs pinned to each other on her head. She was burnt like leather, walking barefoot. And this was in when did we go to frickin' Vegas? Was it May or June? I don't even remember. So much I want to remove it from my memory. It was fun to hang out with my friends, but I shouldn't have gone. It was boring. Besides hanging with my friends. Um, so she was walking around barefoot, and she had this like slip of a dress on, if that. And people were just, like, ignoring her, and I wanted to be like, "Can we get her some water or something?" And everybody's like, "No, just leave her alone." Like, the people around us were saying that, like, she's around that area all the time, and so she's just, like, kind of hostile and stuff, and I was like, "Okay, well, that sucks." It was just really hard to see, so and I mean, it's not like I haven't seen homeless people before, but I've never seen somebody in a state like that before. It was really kind of jarring. And it's really sad that somebody's been forgotten that way and they're living. It's it boggles my mind. So yeah, sorry to digress, but again, I hate Las Vegas. So, they end up going to Las Vegas. They parade their children around. They have them wearing the same kind of clothings, like weird. And then the next year, the family ends up heading to Disneyland. And again, they're all wearing matching shirts. And the family photos posted to Louise's social media showed that she had a really huge family. So in 2014, David and Louise moved the family to a new home in Paris, California. And then the next year, Louise gave birth to their 13th child. Now, the community held a holiday decorating contest in December of 2016, and the Turpins built a nativity scene in their front yard. And then David and Louise and 5 of their children attended the ceremony where the winners were announced. Now, we're going to move on to the rescue, but we are going to talk about the investigation and then what kind of things they found. So don't get disappointed that we're going into the rescue first, and then we'll get into more of, what they found during the investigation. So, January 14th, 2018, a 911 call is placed to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. A young girl who we now know as Jordan Turpin told the dispatcher that she had escaped her home through a window and described the horror that she and her 12 siblings were living in. When questioned, the young girl, Jordan, did not know what medication was, what day of the week it was, and the call was being made from a deactivated cell phone. And at that point, we just have to be really, really lucky and fortunate and thankful that those deactivated cell phones can still call 911, because if they didn't have that capability, I don't know that these children would have made it out of there. So Jordan ends up telling the dispatcher, "I just ran away from home and we have abusing parents." And when asked how they were abused. Jordan said, "They hit us, they like to throw us across the room, they pull out our hair, they yank out our hair, and my 2 little sisters right now are chained up." And Jordan didn't know her own address. She had to find a street sign to help her tell the dispatcher where she was. And the dispatcher was able to track the phone using GPS. And then 22 minutes after Jordan made the initial call, a deputy ends up arriving and made contact with Jordan. You can actually hear and see the 911 call and the body cam photo because of the 2020 episode. I think it was 2020 or Dayline. 2020, I believe. The 2020 episode that Jordan and Jennifer Turpin did with Diane Sawyer. It's all very, in my opinion, harrowing. Like, Jordan, for real, is a hero for her siblings, and seeing the lives that they're living now. Some of them aren't on social media. Jennifer, Jordan, and then one of their younger sisters is on social media, but she's not very public about it. Um, it's been rewarding and amazing to see them thrive despite what they've been through and what they're still going through. That they still have a very difficult time kind of adjusting, but they're overall doing well. So I guess that's the happy ending in this story. So 2 hours after she made the call, Jordan's parents are David and Louise are put in handcuffs and then arrested. So when the officers went to the Turpin house and they end up knocking on the door, it took them several minutes before, like, waiting out on the porch before anybody answered. Now, the deputies advised that they were there for a welfare concern and entered the home. David asked, like, "Do you have a warrant?" And the deputies were like, "We don't need one." They have somebody who's allegedly escaped, so they now have probable cause to enter. Um, so I remember seeing that and I was like, "Yeah, dude," because I saw his body cam footage and I was like, "Shut the hell up." Do they have a warrant? Like, you have way more things to worry about than that. So deputies end up asking the couple how many children they have, but Louise wanted to know why they were even at the home. And she has this really, like, little meek voice when she's on there. It reminds me, if anybody has seen that Keep Sweet documentary on Netflix about the FLDS and Warren Jeffs, like, they have that Keep Sweet voice, like that very high pitched, like, "Oh my god, the world is wonderful." She's like, "You got a call?" Like that. So she's just like, "You got a call?" And one of the deputies said that he wasn't sure if it was the girl who left or one of the neighbors who saw her walking down the street. He said, "We'll get to the bottom of it eventually." And on the body cam footage, he sounds eerily friendly and neutral, as if he doesn't know anything about what's going on in the house. And I think they didn't expect it, right? So they were like, "Oh, this girl ran away. She's alleging all these things. We'll go home, see the home is in great and tidy order, and just be like, have a conversation with the kid about making false allegations." Like, I truly think that that's probably what they were thinking when they first got this call. Water break. So who knows, right? So as deputies end up moving through the house, they find that the 2 younger sisters who Jordan had said were chained up, um, or they end up finding them. They weren't chained up at the time, but a few minutes later, they were told, you know, they were told, oh my god, to tell the deputies where the chains were. They were kinda like, "Where are you chained up?" They're like, "Yeah, show me where." So they did. So the deputies end up moving, back to the front of the house and noticed that a door was almost completely obscured by David Turpin and then a mountain of boxes. Inside, they find a boy who was chained up to the bed. So immediately they have cause to be like, "Okay, we have a situation here." And they arrest David and Louise immediately. Now, as they lead the couple out of the house, the deputies in the house can't find the keys to unlock the chain, and they ask Louise, "Where are the keys for these chains? Like, we gotta get these kids out of them." And she's like, "Oh, my son and daughter can tell you." Which they did. Like, here's hello. You think they wouldn't have done that? So, that was such BS to me. I was just like, even in that moment, like, you have no humanity in yourself whatsoever. It's all gone. And you literally just like, "Yeah, the kids can tell you." And that was just initial, like, a defense for them, right? To be like, "Oh, we didn't do this." Like, the kids had this whole thing, like, they love being chained up. What? Come on. So, because of that and the lack of help, the deputies literally had to wade through a sea of trash inside the house and even in the master bedroom, and the keys were eventually located in there, and then the last child who was chained up was released. So we can go into the investigation. Let's see. Oscar says, stories like these always break my heart because you have to imagine that in this very moment in time, somebody else could be living that nightmare and we might never hear about it. I literally think that all the time when I'm listening to these cases, either on some of the podcasts I'm listening to or when we're researching. I'm just like, think of all the stories we haven't heard. Think of all the people who are still in those situations, adult to child, that are just living in this nightmare, and we have no clue. I hate that. So I agree with you, Oscar, on that for sure. So the investigation. Now, the children were taken to the local hospitals where they were examined and fed. They literally had to be treated very much like people who were in concentration camps are treated or in those work camps, because you can't just feed them, right? You have to introduce food slowly because it could overwhelm their system because they've been used to this starving condition. So a lot of the mistakes, which they didn't know when they were rescuing like Holocaust survivors, is that they were letting them kind of gorge themselves on food, reasonably so, right? You think like, here, have all this food, but it actually caused them a lot of health concerns and problems in the interim while they were being saved. So, from that, we learned, yes, these things need to be kind of done at a step level. And that's what happened with the Turpins. The Turpin children told investigators that they were only allowed one meal per day, were often forced to watch their parents eat lavishly. They ate fast food. There was like all of these fast food containers and wrappers all around the house. Um, and the only child who was actually not malnourished was the youngest one, who was only 2 years old at the time of the arrest, which is like one of the little things I guess you can be thankful for, like glad that they didn't torture the baby. But I wonder at like what age did this torture begin and how long did she have before her life was ultimately ruined, um, at the hands of these two people. So they ended up telling the investigators that the torture had begun years earlier when they had been tied with ropes. After one child was hogtied but still managed to get free, the parents began chaining them and padlocking them to their beds. The children would often remain chained for weeks at a time and were not allowed to go to the bathroom. Even something as simple as washing their hands above the wrist would result in punishment for playing in the water. Everything I read about these people, like, I hate them even more after reading about them. So, although each child was born in a hospital, most had never been back to a doctor and none had ever been to a dentist. One of the older male children was allowed to attend classes at a local university, but Louise escorted him there and waited outside his classroom for him. So toys were found throughout the house and they were all in their original packaging, but the children were never allowed to have them or play with them. These were all for Louise's benefit. We find out later that Louise, as we'll discuss, had a shopping addiction. And you find that with people who've been abused sometimes is that they get that instant gratification from shopping, then they start hoarding. And so that's essentially what Louise was doing. The family was nocturnal. They would sleep all day, which made the torture and abuse easier to hide because most people, when they were sleeping, were at work, etc. So it was easier to hide. One of Louise's sisters said that she, Louise, and their other sister were all sexually abused by their grandfather when they were children. And worse yet, their mother allowed it to happen and even accepted money from the grandfather. Their grandfather was one of the richest men in town and had allegedly sexually abused his own daughter, Phyllis, when she was just a young girl, too. Louise did not attend the funerals of her parents, Wayne and Phyllis, when they died in 2016, just 3 months apart. I don't think there was any love lost between those three. And I don't blame her. I mean, if she was a product of abuse and trauma, then I don't blame her for, not having the need or want to go see her parents' burial. I get that. But, in a weird circle of life sort of way, she's essentially maybe created the same fate for herself. Like, who will be there to mourn her when it's her time? I don't know. So, around the time that Louise turned 40, she told one of her sisters that she and David had stopped attending church and started going to bars and started experimenting with other partners. Louise began drinking for the first time in her life and also made contact with a man online, traveling to Huntsville, Alabama to have sex with him. She repeated this a year later. The Turpin children called that even said that even though several of them were adults, they were so severely malnourished that they looked much younger than they were. The eldest, Jennifer, was 29 at the time, and she only weighed 82 pounds. Still to this day, she definitely looks healthier than the 82 pounds when they were first rescued, but it is taking her some time. I think she's changed her diet, so she's now a vegetarian, I believe. So I'm happy that, like, they're finding what works for them, and, you know, power to them for the vegetarian thing. She finds really great eats in the city that she lives in on her TikTok. I think her TikTok name is Timo Musica, something like that. We follow each other on it, so it's something like that. I used to think it was Team Mom Music. I don't know why. So it's like Timo Musica or something like that. Um, Now, after the arrest, the Turpins were held on a bond of several $1 million each. They were charged with multiple counts of abuse and false imprisonment. David was charged with a lewd act on a minor for one of the children who was under 14. And in February 2019, David and Louise accepted plea deals, which gave them life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Um, a lot of the information that we do know comes from that 2020 interview. Because they accepted plea deals, there wasn't really any information to go over in the court, right? The children gave their own impact statement, some of them did, and they went through their own kind of situation after. So, after being rescued and then sent to foster care or given other assistance since they were adults now, the system failed the Turpin children once again. Several of the children were abused by their foster parents, and the adult children were not allowed access to the trust fund, which was created by people from around the world. I remember in 2018 when the story first broke and the information was starting to kind of come to light about what kind of environment they were living in, what kind of odds they had beaten by, Jordan escaping essentially. And they were really obscured. Like they were hidden from the public eye for a very long time for protection, right? Like it was as much as everybody wants to and is curious to know like what they're doing, what's going on, like it's a huge adjustment when you haven't been exposed to the real world in like a decade. And for some, their whole lives, except out of these random trips from Disney World, which is likely very overwhelming and definitely overstimulating, given the environment that they were in. So, um, that's my dog again. Jordan was in foster care, even though she was an adult, but she was suddenly and abruptly told that she had to leave shortly before the interview that she did with ABC's Diane Sawyer. So they have this whole thing and it's really intricate and too much to go into, but essentially the funds were misappropriated or like held back from them. Anytime that they would ask for like rent money, food money, to get a car, to go to school, they were denied it, being like, "It doesn't qualify for this," or something like that, and I can't remember if, like, one of the people who the case manager who was, like, responsible for the funds and looking over the funds was the one, like, denying it or if she was trying to help. There's, like, varying things out there about it, but to my knowledge, they still haven't gotten any of any access to their money or anything like that. Um So that's really the story of them as it pertains to it. David and Louise, you can watch the sentencing and everything on YouTube, and you can listen to those impact statements as well. Um, I know that like David couldn't get through his, elocution, if you will. He was like sobbing and couldn't get through it and had his attorney read it and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, dude, whatever, man. Like, I have no sympathy for people like him whatsoever who commit these kind of atrocious crimes. So I was like, "Okay, sure, dude." Louise, I don't know how to feel about her. I don't think that I think at some point when you start to abuse other people, you have the responsibility and knowledge that this isn't the right thing to do and it's not okay. And so I hold her accountable pretty much equally to David. I don't know if anybody else feels the same. How do we feel in terms of accountability? Like to me, they're both responsible equally. Um, for the abuse that was perpetrated on their children that they chose to have and that they chose to bring into this world. Um, it's just kind of incredible to me that this would be a whole thing. I don't know. Um, so yes. Oh, so I was going to tell you guys about kind of how I have interacted with the sisters. So I've mostly interacted with Jennifer the most. They are represented by an agency now, which is great because I was trying to, since they did the 2020 interview, I thought that they might be ready to share their story. Um, like with maybe a smaller audience, if you will, at the podcast festival that I co-founded or whatever and running. It's happening in August, by the way. Um, I thought they would maybe ready. I've been seeing Jordan like say a lot of things on her social media, like in her bios and stuff like that, that she wants to be a motivational speaker. So I was like, oh, maybe this would be a good opportunity in a controlled setting, right? Like I wouldn't just let them be on this huge panel with like 200 people in front of them asking them questions. Like, people's curiosities are piqued. And the goal of that was to not have them like regurgitate what they've already shared on 2020 or whatever. The goal was to be like, here's where I am now. Here's what I want to do for the future. What can people do to advocate to help people who may be in situations like you were, right? Something like that. I don't know. It was a thought. So I ended up reaching out to Jennifer on TikTok and I asked her, because I was like, I really don't want to talk with them directly because I don't want it to seem like I don't know, I didn't want it to seem like I was taking advantage of them in any way I mean, like, I know I wouldn't, but, it to me, it was just, like, a sensitive thing, like, if I'd rather talk to somebody who has the awareness of what something like this is, like, what this festival is, as opposed to trying to explain it to somebody who hasn't been to one, like, Jordan's been to what, like Coachella or something like that, or went to a Justin Bieber concert. Like, that's very different than attending a festival where you have the potential to interact with people who know your story and who are interested in what you have to say kind of at that level. So that's kind of where I was coming from. So she ends up giving me the information to her representative, which I was very happy for and very thankful for because like I said, um I didn't want to have to like work through those things like fees and all that stuff. So they ended up deciding not to come. Bummer. They ended up deciding not to come just because it wasn't something that they were ready for. When I talked to their rep, she was just like, they're just not ready for something like that. The 2020 interview was very controlled. The other stuff, like the social media, that's all controlled by them, right? So I was like, I totally get it. I just wanted to make it like a safe space, a safe opportunity for them to be like, maybe we can do just like a private thing where it's like max 30 people and they will pre-field questions and stuff like that. And if you need to have like a room where you can escape to go and just like decompress, or if it's overwhelming, I could even put you in a different hotel so you're not in the same hotel or whatever. Um, but yeah, they ended up deciding that it just wasn't the right time for them. So I was like, bummer. But through that, and because of my fascination with true crime TikTok, I was able to get Mariah Day to agree to come to the festival. And you may know her story inadvertently. It is the It's known now as the thing about Pam. But Mariah's been sharing her experience and story on TikTok about losing her mother, Betsy Faria, who is um, the victim in this case. And it's been really interesting to see because she's kind of navigating these waters solo, if you will. I've offered the information of Sarah Turney because she's an incredible victims advocate. She's been through this. She knows what this is like. And Sarah has excellent connections with other victim advocacies, or victim advocates, sorry, like Maura Murray's sister and Kelsey German, So I was just hoping that they could connect on that level and kind of help Mariah navigate that. So Mariah will be at the True Crime Podcast Festival. She will be sharing her story and more so the experience. Like, not again, it's not to regurgitate, re-traumatize. It truly is to be able to tell them, like, here's how true crime has affected me, right? Because when you think about it, like, everybody knows this story, like the thing about Pam, if you will. Betsy has essentially gotten lost in all of this. And then because of that, Mariah has gotten lost in this. Like, her grief and her trauma, like, the whole thing is so sordid, all because of this one person. And it's a lot to take in. So I'm excited. I do have good news as we wrap things up for the Turpin family. Um, I do have good news. So next week, I will have Bob Mata on from Defense Diaries, and he's the defense attorney who I was talking about last week. If you remember, his dad was the John Wayne Gacy defense attorney, and he will be on next week to talk about the Stephen Avery case because we had agreed that's the case we wanted him to talk about. He's actually really well versed in it. So he is going to be very, very thrilled to join us next week to talk about kind of all things Stephen Avery, answer your questions about like the defense, the legal system in terms of how that all worked. Um, and maybe we'll touch on Brendan Dassey's too. Who knows? I don't know. But I do think that it'll be a really interesting conversation. And you get to ask, somebody who's essentially behind the scenes, behind the desk, if you will, in the courtroom, not behind the scenes because he's a defense attorney, so it's whatever. But I think it'll be a really great episode. And then the week after that, I am going to have, hold please, I have to get her name, Dr. Stacy Merkin on. She is a She is a very talented lady. She is a criminologist, victimologist, um, and a generalist who focuses on serial killers, cold cases, sex offenders, media, policy, all criminal justice and criminality, I guess. She's going to be on to discuss the differences between psychopathy, sociopathy, and kind of how that field's changed, how the media's gotten wrong, how we've gotten it wrong. I'm very, very excited about that conversation. So if you've always or been fascinated on the forensic psychology side of true crime, that is going to be one you do not want to miss. So we don't have a date set yet, but I think it'll be within the next couple of weeks. The other thing I want to remind everybody else about is we have this event coming up on Moment House on July 14th next week. That's why I'm going to be in LA. So, it's going to be me as the host or moderator, if you will. We're going to have, and that's why we drink. So, Em and Christine, two girls, one ghost, Corinne and Sabrina, and then Sarah Turney from Voices of Justice or Voices for Justice. Sorry, I always do that. Voices for Justice. We're all going to be there talking about true crime, doing like some true crime trivia, all super respectful. So, don't worry. It's just going to be an interesting conversation. So you can go to, I can put the link in the chat if you're interested, www.momenthouse.com/the great minds of true crime. And then if you end up getting tickets to that event, so the cool thing about this is Max Cutler, who is the founder of Parcast, and my boss is going to be matching ticket sales donations up to $125,000. I chose Hope's Door, which is a local domestic violence shelter that basically helps women kind of get back on their feet after escaping a situation like that. So since it's close to my heart, where I live and within my hometown, if you will. It's something that's really important to me. It's also what I'm raising money for the True Crime Podcast Festival. So I'm really excited that he's kind of doing that. I think that's neat. Not something everybody does. And then they're also releasing the Colts book, which is super cool. Parcast's first book and Max's first book. So awesome things are happening. Oh, don't forget tonight, I'm going to be on the Popspiracy room. What time is that at? Oh my gosh, sorry, friends. What time is the Popspiracy Room? Let's take a gander. It is at 8 p.m. Central Time in about another hour. So, if you are interested in joining that, we're gonna be talking about Haunted Places Part 2. If you missed last week, it was really good, which is I was like, "I've been there. I know about this." So they asked me to join them this week because I know so much about these haunted places. So tonight, at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, 9 p.m. Eastern, what is that? 8, 7, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm gonna be on there with Aaron and Megan, and it's gonna be so much fun. We're gonna be talking about the, haunted places, and then one of them intersects with true crime, which is one I have been to, so I am very excited to discuss that. So be sure to listen in if you're hanging around that time. But that's really all I have for tonight, you guys. I'm excited. Make sure if you're joining us next week to come ready for a discussion with Bob. He is incredibly fascinating, super knowledgeable, just a great, great guy. So make sure you're ready to discuss the Stephen Avery case. I think that's the one we were excited about because we can talk about the evidence, the who we think did it. If you don't believe that Stephen Avery is the perpetrator of the crime, etc. So I am very, very excited about that. But otherwise, I think we are good for this evening. I really appreciate you, as always, joining me. It's been incredible, a lot of fun. I've been having so much fun hosting these every Tuesday. But that ends our show for tonight. So I really, again, appreciate everybody joining me. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the evening and that you join us tonight on Popspiracy's channel on Spotify Live. All right, that's all I have now. So have a good evening, friends. Bye, friends.